Okay, thank you, Eve. We're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you all for coming and taking part of your time this morning to be part of our presentation. If you're in the right room, great. If not, welcome. We're glad that you're with us anyway. This presentation is going to be focused on overcoming barriers to comprehensive self-care during the COVID-19 pandemic, which obviously has had a significant impact over the last year of our life. So we're going to talk about how that has impacted us and what it means to the way that we're taking care of ourselves. You can see the agenda here, but first, my colleagues and I wanted to introduce ourselves before we got started. My name is Dr. Stephen Wright. I am an assistant professor at Columbus State University in Columbus, Georgia. And I'm really happy to be here this morning.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Anya Lainas, and I am also an assistant professor at Columbus State University in Columbus, Georgia, and very excited to talk to you about this topic.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Stella Michael-Makri, and I am an associate professor and the program coordinator at Columbus State University.
Well, thank you, everyone. And again, just a kind of quick run through of what we're going to be covering. We're going to talk a little bit about the impact that COVID-19 has had on stress levels, on mental health concerns for the general population, and look at some of those numbers and how they've shifted over time. We're going to look at, very formal definitions of self-care and wellness. And then we're going to compare this concept of comprehensive self-awareness, self-care versus superficial self-care. And then we're really going to be getting into the purpose of what we're hoping you walk away with. Some of you may be aware of this Indivisible Self, which is an evidence-based model of wellness. Some of you may not be, so we're going to dive into that model a bit, and then we're going to get together and have a little bit of a group discussion and an activity to close ourselves out for today's session. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get us rolling, and Dr. Makri is going to get us started.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Wright. We have all experienced a number of challenges relating to this COVID-19 situation, with the number one challenge for all of us being to be able to adapt to this new life and world reality. Things have drastically changed for all of us, and life as we knew it significantly changed, including our social and family interactions. We had to distance from our family members, from friends, colleagues, students, and so on. We all had to manage the fear of contracting the virus, or those close to us, especially our elders, especially for those of us who might have our parents together or close to us. And we had to adjust working from home, as well as homeschooling our children, for those of us who have children, while also managing work, managing the stress of the virus situation, manage our loved ones, and how to keep them safe, and making sure that our children continue receiving the education that they need, and us also keeping our sanity. We also had to deal with situations where a good number of people have lost their jobs and income, which of course caused additional stress and anxiety regarding being able to meet basic needs, including housing and food. Next slide, Dr. So all of the above challenges have caused significant stress and anxiety, as well as grief and depression. People have reported changes in their sleeping and eating patterns, worsening of their chronic physical concerns, as well as mental health concerns. We have seen an increase in use of substance, difficulties remaining focused and concentrating on work or studies, increased concerns in professional and academic performances, as well as increased concerns relating to interpersonal relationships. So here we have some information, some statistics that we would like to share with you. We have symptoms of anxiety disorder are approximately 3 times higher compared to previous year. Symptoms of depressive disorder are approximately 4 times higher compared to previous year. And suicidal ideation is approximately 2 times higher compared to previous year. We would like to note that part of our presentation is interactive, and we will be asking you to share some personal experiences. So please share whatever you feel comfortable with us. And we would like to ask you, in what ways had the pandemic impacted you the most? And feel free to either unmute your microphone or put it in chat.
There's a comment that says my anxiety level has increased since March.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary.
Mine has been for work. I own a group practice, and so having to supervise and see all of my clients remotely, actually, and I was home doing that, and I don't have a dedicated office space. And so being able to balance work life and home life from working at home has been a significant challenge.
Yes, thank you.
I think the loss of relationships, and not really loss, but the cessation of relationships, interpersonal relationships, as I suffered from that a lot. Having a lot of family in the States, so the opportunity to even go visit or even to see friends locally has been very stressful.
Thank you for sharing. And in the chat, I see some comments like a bit more constrained, just shy of trapped, that's pretty powerful statement there. Stress of carrying my own anxiety and feelings, and then having space for clients as well. The weight of my clients' issues and the difficulty in living their problems at work, loss of time with family, has struggled with having everyone home at all the time. Yes, Lauren, I can definitely relate to that. How do we all get everything done, balancing husband's job and children needs as well as your job? Thank you, Lauren. Monica shares work-life family balance, working from home with husband and college-age son, misconnection with family, friends, and community, higher anxiety, not knowing how to help clients, family impact, small space at home without a dedicated office space. I have to convert one of my children's bedrooms to an office, so I can definitely relate to that, Alison. Thank you for sharing. We have the deaths as well. A couple of folks close to me passed away from COVID, as well as a few students who have lost parents or grandparents. Yes, that's where, you know, the grief and bereavement comes in. Catherine shares that as a graduate student, a teacher, and parent of 4 school-age kids, a lot to balance there. Adaptations and adjustments. I have had to learn new skills quickly and do things in very different ways. I struggled with the feeling of powerlessness and loss of control over my life. I struggled with all the fear of encountering other people. Yes, definitely can relate to all of these comments. Working from home has been a positive and negative experience. Balancing work, life, and family is complicated. Yes, complicated indeed. Thank you, all of you, for willing to share and being so open with us. We see that we all have very similar experiences, a lot to balance. We were thrown at this without any warning. Our lives had to change, you know, from one minute to next. So I will let Dr. Wright continue with.
Yeah, I echo Dr. Makri, and I appreciate you all sharing those experiences, either, you know, verbally or in the chat. There are a lot of universally shared experiences, but also one thing that I noticed in responses is that we talked about various aspects of our life. which is a very important consideration. We all have many roles in our daily lives. We're not just who we are right now sitting in the room as a student or a professional. We're students, we're workers, but some of us are also parents or caregivers. Some of us are family members, we're friends, we're community members. So it's important to pay attention to all those aspects of our roles and our identity as people. It's important to be aware of how stress impacts us in each of our roles. So we want to focus moving forward on being aware of how the pandemic over the past year has impacted our approach to wellness. We might find differing experiences there. The last person who shared in the chat said working from home has been a challenging and a positive experience. So it may not necessarily all be challenging. There might be some good things that we're pulling through this or from this. So it's important to really kind of consider those, but we'll also consider how we might have had to, or maybe still need to, adjust our approach to best taking care of ourselves. Hopefully as things start, kind of transitioning back to a more sense of normalcy. But we don't know. So we need to still continue taking care of ourselves. So we're going to focus on those things. First, if we look at very formalized definitions of self-care and wellness, if we look at self-care, it's just simply the practice of taking action to preserve or improve one's health. If we look at the definition of wellness, it's the state of being in good health, especially as an actively pursued goal. And that actively pursued goal is something that I want you to kind of keep in mind as we go through the remainder of the presentation. So in essence, self-care is really what helps us to obtain a positive state of wellness. So for a moment, before we actually get into the model that we're introducing, I want to compare the concepts, and you may have heard of these concepts, but comparing superficial self-care to comprehensive self-care, which is something that's been examined by specifically Dr. Lori Peterball, who is a counselor educator and also a mental health counselor as well. So we're going to look at these two terms and see how they compare to one another, because they're both very important for us to have an understanding of as we approach this concept of trying to achieve a state of wellness in our life. So superficial self-care. Superficial self-care is more of a quick fix or a way of intervening, if you want to look at it that way. It's very reactionary by nature. So I'm going to kind of connect to my own personal experiences here. But for example, I may notice at the end of my day when I get home, well, I'm doing a lot of work from home, but when I finish my day, that I'm feeling really stressed. And this stress can impact my interactions with students. It can impact my interactions with my family members, my friends, or I may just be holding on to it internally. So an example of practicing superficial self-care in this situation could be, okay, I notice that I'm stressed and I say to myself, Stephen, you've got to do something. Maybe I can go for a run. Maybe I can just take 30 minutes to myself and read something that's not work related. Maybe I can cook a meal that I enjoy. What we notice in that example is that this is very much a menu approach to wellness. And it's also reactionary. It's saying, okay, I noticed something and I've got to do something about it. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with self-care at all, but this approach doesn't reflect intentionality. It doesn't reflect kind of an intentional plan to approach this process. And it doesn't reflect that I'm consistently doing these things. So when I say it's a menu approach to wellness, it's like, oh, maybe I can try running. Maybe I can try cooking. Maybe I can try reading something that's not work related. So self-care is great. We don't want to get away from that message, but we also want to kind of look at it from a different perspective. And that would be comprehensive self-care. That's a bit different than superficial. So this would require that I actually take time to examine me as a person, myself, holistically. So when we say holism, when we think holistically, we think mind, body, spirit. There are multiple aspects of who we are. So I have to examine myself holistically, and I have to intentionally have a plan to take care of myself holistically in a way that addresses stress that I experience across my identities, across my roles as a counselor educator, as a husband, as a friend, as a community member, etc. So this is an approach that we want for our students, we want for our colleagues, we want it for our peers, our loved ones, and we want it for ourselves, obviously. So I want to achieve a state of wellness, something that's a bit more reflective of comprehensive self-care. So this is the model we wanted to introduce. And in fact, if you can bear with me for a moment, I'm going to open up the chat and share a file with everyone. And this is a file that you can kind of have as a reference. I've got to make sure I'm attaching the right. Now, this file is a personal wellness plan that's based off of this model. So what you'll see at the very top of this plan is you'll see a way to kind of utilize it in your own life. But really the purpose, and you can totally look at that, you know, once this whole session is done, but really a big purpose of me sharing this is for it to serve as a reference point when we get back to our discussion, okay? Because the bottom really explains or describes this model in a bit more specificity. Some of you may be familiar with the Indivisible Self. This is, you know, an evidence-based model of wellness that was developed by Myers and Sweeney, who you might be familiar with them. They're pretty much rock stars in the counseling profession. The late Myers and Sweeney. And this provides an alternative perspective for viewing wellness across the lifespan in various roles and in different ways that really looks at us as holistic people, as holistic human beings. So there are 5 domains that are part of this model. We have the creative self, the coping self, the social self, the essential self, and the physical self. And I want to take a little bit of time looking through each one of those. As we go through these, I want you to intentionally be thinking about how each area presents itself in your own life, through your own personal experiences, but also be thinking about, there are going to be some examples listed below. What are some things that I'm doing that are helping me accomplish or approach this specific area? But also, what are some things that might be present in my life that serve as barriers to me really kind of working on or paying attention to this particular domain? So the first domain that we're going to look at is the creative self. And all of these domains, they have multiple wellness dimensions. Some have 5, some have 4, some have 2. The creative self has 5 wellness dimensions. The first one is thinking. And thinking is really just the opportunity or the experience of being mentally active and experimental throughout your daily experiences. Emotions, just being in touch with and able to express your feelings throughout your daily experiences. Control, how confident you feel that you are to accomplish what it is that you want to accomplish throughout your daily experiences. Work, your ability to do your job and use your skills. Also, work can be related to, you know, being satisfied with the work that you're doing. And positive humor is also part of this domain. It's the ability to laugh at mistakes and use humor through serious or difficult situations. I'm a big fan of humor, using it whenever you possibly can, especially in, you know, of course, in appropriate situations. But being able to laugh because things don't always go according to plan. You know, there are always, you know, mistakes that we make, or, you know, situations that we need to make more light of. So examples, and again, I want you to be thinking about what are some things that are helpful for you in approaching this area, but what are some things that are maybe present in your life that serve as barriers? Mentors, studying, book discussions, workshops, art, creativity, counseling. You're going to see counseling pop up, which is great because as, you know, professionals, we want to advocate for our profession. The competency, feel in your work setting, confident in what you're doing, satisfied with what you're doing, feeling like you have job security, feeling appreciated in your work setting, and also fun and humor. So I'm not going to go through each one of these examples for the sake of time with all of these domains, but I want you to be thinking about what these look like for you as we move through these various domains. The second domain is the coping self. And the coping self has 4 wellness dimensions. The first wellness dimension is leisure. So satisfaction with how we spend our leisure time. I think about this a lot from my perspective because Maybe I come home from work and I really need to be intentional about having time away from responsibilities and spending time, intentional time with my partner. So the time that I'm spending my leisure time, am I checking emails? Am I doing things that, could have been done during other times of my day? Leisure, just being satisfied with how we're spending our leisure time. Are we engaging in hobbies that are meaningful or enjoyable for us? Stress management just relates to our coping skills. I know this is the coping self, but coping skills specifically during times of stress. Self-worth, genuinely accepting ourselves for who we are is an important part of the coping self. And then also realistic beliefs. We're all professionals and students in this room, and I know, and it's been reflected in the literature, but I know from personal experiences, hey, sometimes we set expectations that maybe aren't really as attainable as they could be, or maybe we strive for perfection, which we know is unattainable. So realistic beliefs, just being realistic with our expectations, our goals, etc. You can see a number of examples here: leisure activities, daily relaxation, hobbies that we do during our leisure time, avoiding bad habits or addictions. Again, that would be kind of fitting into stress management, how we're coping during times of stress. Counseling, again, you're seeing that pop up, so that's wonderful. We'll continue seeing that pop up. Self-acceptance, realistic goals, avoiding unrealistic expectations. All of these are examples that fit within this domain. The third of 5 is the social self, and it only has 2 wellness dimensions. So when we think about, maybe how this, various aspects of ourself may have been impacted over the last year, this one certainly could come into play, but I'll let you all answer that for yourselves. The social self includes friendship, which just refers to any social relationships individually or at maybe community levels. Just really that friendship is being able to trust others and feeling understood by others. If you feel like you're getting those things out of the relationships that you have, that could really kind of, according to this model, classify or qualify under friendship. Love, and it doesn't have to be romantic, but love is just the ability to be intimate with others and having and receiving acceptance from others without conditions, that unconditional regard and love that we have for other people. You can see it could be intimate relationships, but it doesn't have to be social or intimate relationships. Some of the ways that these might come into play: parties, potlucks, happy hours, networking, engaging in the mentorship process, study groups. There are a lot of different ways in which these things can really kind of come up with the social self. The essential self has 4 wellness dimensions. Spirituality, and this can look different for various people, but really this is focusing on feeling as though we are more than just our mind and our body. So it doesn't necessarily have to relate to religion, although it could. Gender identity and cultural identity. Gender identity is really kind of having satisfaction with and feeling supported in one's gender. Cultural identity, we've talked about, how that's a multifaceted, concept. Culture can be race, ethnic, gender, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, etc. Cultural identity is really just satisfaction with and feeling supported in one's cultural identity. And self-care, it's a part of this whole process, which was what we reflected on earlier. Taking responsibility for one's wellness through self-care in a preventative way, one that's not as much intervening. You can see examples here below: engaging in things that give you purpose, that really provide peace and enrichment in your life. Prayer and meditation, gender and cultural support fit with 2 and 3, and self-care obviously with 4. And as we wrap up this model, the physical self is the last one, and it has 2 wellness dimensions: exercise and nutrition. So we think about ourselves holistically. Obviously our physical self impacts our mental well-being, but obviously, we want to think about the physical components and the mental components. When you think about going to a doctor, these are the areas that you're going to be paying attention to. Exercise, am I engaging in some form of activity? And that can look different across the board for various people. Nutrition, am I eating well? Am I taking care of my body? So examples, much of those things that you're going to be focusing on. Are we doing the things that are good for us, and are we avoiding the things that are not as good for us from a physical perspective. So that was a very just quick run through or an overview of this model. Again, that's why I provided the attachment so you could have something as a reference point. Before we get into the component where we're really having a discussion about how this looks in our life, which Dr. Lainas, my colleague, is going to kind of facilitate that process, I do want to consider a few thoughts. Okay, so based off what we've discussed, comprehensive self-care and wellness address all of our roles as a parent, as a worker, as a student, as a friend, as a family member, a community member, all of the roles that we have. Comprehensive self-care and wellness intentionally address all of these roles in taking care of ourselves in all of these various contexts. We have to keep in mind the uniqueness of each person. So every person's approach to wellness is unique. We see those various examples. There are certainly things that people do to take care of themselves in various areas that weren't listed there on the example. So we have to really kind of acknowledge and honor the uniqueness of each person in their journey to kind of making this process happen and work for them. We also have to consider how COVID-19 has maybe, and we'll get kind of an understanding from personal experiences here in a moment, has maybe served as a barrier. So considering ways in which you can still actively pursue tending to these areas as the COVID-19 pandemic has gone on and as it continues to go on is a very important consideration. And finally, when we talk about expectations, perfection is not the goal. You're never going, it's kind of like multicultural competency. You're never going to completely get it. It's a continual developmental process. So remember, perfection's unattainable. There are always going to be aspects of ourselves that need more attention than others. This can be an ever-changing process. Okay, so I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Dr. Lainas.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. It was a great reminder of us as a whole being with all those dimensions. So what we've done so far, we started by reflecting on where we are with our wellness. We, Dr. Wright provided us with an assessment tool, sort of speak, and a plan in the attachment for you to continue monitor and evaluate your relationship with the comprehensive self-care and assess which areas need a little bit more attention and which ones are you doing great in. And so now we're going to engage in some discussion around some of the thoughts that came up as you were assessing yourself based on the model. And then we will jump into a planning an activity that will encourage us to make some commitments right now, here today. So next slide, please. So here's some questions, and if you don't mind giving all the questions, I think we wanted to then stop sharing the screen and have a discussion. So I'm going to ask you to reflect and assess again. And here's the questions that we're going to go over, and I want you to feel free to unmute yourself and participate in this discussion. And so first I want to ask, what did your self-care look like before pandemic versus during the pandemic, assuming that we're still in it? And well, when you're thinking about that, I think the second question can go hand in hand. Were there any barriers to your practice of wellness before pandemic or during the pandemic? So what did it look like, and were there any barriers?
Prior to the pandemic, I would go and sing a lot, and that was a big portion of my self-care. With the bars closed down and restaurants having limited capacity, venues were extremely limited, and it highly impacted my self-care. I had to substitute new items, of self-care.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Eve. So I see the message in the chat also saying used to have full body massage twice a month and truly miss that. And so what Eve and Monica are saying is that the way that they had a routine with the limit of social interaction or ability to leave home as they used to, that sort of created the barrier towards how you can get what you think, what you typically use to relax, right? And so made you think, what is that I need to do to substitute that, right? So Eve said, I had to figure out how I can fulfill that need. That's really important. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would just say that social interaction, spending lots of time with family, not just my immediate family, but extended family and close friends, is very much a part of how I that fed my soul, probably my extroverted self on some level. And so, and I'm in California, so we had significant lockdowns for a long time. And so I really did feel kind of cut off from that source. So I've had to, supplement it as best we can, whether it's through Zoom, which everybody has Zoom fatigue for the most part, I'm assuming, but but through Zoom and just trying to stay connected and in different ways. But yeah, that's been a significant barrier, to be sure. And so yeah, I've had to try and find other ways to fill that.
Thank you, James. And Alina, I believe, I hope I'm saying your name right, talked also about importance of connection with family and friends. And so I think it's important that James brings up that I had to substitute that, right? So the need was still there, the barrier appeared, and you had to figure out a creative way, which, luckily for technology, but also there was another barrier. Then we all got very fatigued with the amount of time we spend on. So while you were trying to fix one area of your need, it probably was potentially hurting the other, which is the physical health. Okay. So there's some examples, great examples of sort of overcoming the barriers, right? Practicing yoga with family via Zoom sessions, or just sitting on the patio listening to the birds. And so I'm seeing that some of the creative self is coming in, the problem solving skills. We sort of, and we've talked about that amongst ourselves when we were preparing this presentation, as to how we had to look at life differently. Right? We knew our needs, and then we were sort of pushed to become creative in the way that we are meeting those needs. And so certainly when you need to get away and you could not, have the space in your house, Lauren shared that used to go for random drive to find time and space for myself. That's important. And in some states, the lockdowns were a lot more severe, while in others, you could still, be out and about in your car, and that was a way. And Catherine sharing that her self-care was sporadic, and it was in a season more of a surviving, right? So it's a great reflection on fear of contracting potentially the virus and having fatal health issues. And you went through that. Wow. So and how, so I guess when in the light of Catherine sharing that that it was more about the survival and not really thinking about taking care of yourself, she's also saying that go ahead, Stephen. Yes.
And I was thinking too, as I was reading through Catherine's experience and a lot of your experiences, but Catherine, one, thanks for sharing that. And the part I noticed at the end is these things cause me to essentially recreate self-care from scratch, which we hear a lot of that from other people, of like, there were these things that I did that I had to adjust. And that flexibility and, that resilience to be able to do that, to still, although you were focused more on surviving with the situations that you were going through, you still were very intentional about like, if I don't do something to take care of myself as I'm trying to survive, it's going to be a worse situation. So Catherine and Dr. Lainas may want to elaborate a bit more, but I noticed that, and I forget some of the things that I think sometimes. So I wanted to share that very quickly. So Catherine, I appreciate you noting that.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Wright. And you actually, Dr. Wright, you bring us to very important points. So while we somewhat been overwhelmed with what barriers pandemic created for us, I believe that it is really important to highlight that it also provided an opportunity, right? And so Dr. Makri mentioned with us earlier that she had to adjust the way that her life was, both in, to adjust to some of the new barriers, but also create an opportunity, right? Whether it's more walks in and, around the house and in nature, gardening, etc. Then Catherine also mentioning that some of those horrible experiences actually caused to think about the new way of self-care. Thank you all for sharing. So my next point of discussion is, now that you know the difference between superficial self-care or sort of a menu approach versus comprehensive self-care, I want you to reflect to what sort of pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, which one were you using or maybe still using, or was there any shift?
Candice, do you mean that you started exercising more?
It's the same.
It's the same.
So I adapted. Instead of going to the gym, I do that at home now or outside when I can.
Thank you. Claudia?
Yeah, I noticed that I became more aware of my self-care. And it was kind of like a survival, because I was isolated alone in my own apartment, and I was more intentional, setting up a routine and being structured so that I wouldn't fall, so I wouldn't fail. Because being a support counselor for a alternative campus, I had students and also teachers that were reliant on me throughout the day. So I said, I need to make sure that I'm good and I'm not, falling into depression or anxiety. And so I started, I was hyper-focused on setting up a routine, which I really didn't. I know I kind of had it, but I wasn't as mindful about it. So it was like, okay, I'm going to get up at this time, set an alarm, make my bed so I'm accomplished, make sure I'm changed, make sure my makeup is right so that I feel like I'm going somewhere, even though I'm not. And just those kinds of things that I was really intentional about. And kind of thinking now, maybe before I did have some superficial things like, I'll go to the gym every now and then, or, I'm going to try. But now it's like, I need to make sure that I'm in the gym minimal 4 times or 3 times a week, minimal 3 times a week. And so I noticed a shift now, knowing the difference between superficial and comprehensive.
Excellent. Yes, thank you, Claudia. So this is exactly, I'm so glad that you shared, because we do hear that while we all know self-care is important, but people are becoming more aware. And what Dr. Wright said, the menu approach lacks intentionality. And what you shared is exactly what, what the comprehensive self-care is about. It's intentional. It's focusing on all of the aspects of self. Dr. Makri, can you help me with the chat a little bit?
Absolutely, yes. James is sharing that he believes that he was actually more intentional than what I had thought I was prior to the pandemic. I probably would have defined my self-care as sporadic, but I noticed the intentional nature of it during the pandemic. So there was more intention, just like what the majority of us have been sharing. Catherine is also sharing that we try to maximize the effectiveness of our activities to include multiple aspects of self-care. And an example, trying a new recipe that's nutritious and novel while inviting the kids to assist the kitchen and chat or listen to music. That's wonderful. I have done the same too, Catherine, with my children. Monica shares that she did what Claudia said, created a routine as a school-based therapist and transitioned to shift to personal time after work routine. And Lauren also shares, I would say that I was much more concerned with helping my children develop comprehensive self-care plans, but I think my own self-care was more superficial. Yes, yes. And I say again, yes, that's, parents taking care of other family members. Our focus is first to take care of them, help them adjust, and we are forgetting us, and we're forgetting how important it is for us to be well and do well in order for us to be able to help them be well. And I'm just wondering, Lauren, have you done the change there to ensure that you are also taking good care of yourself?
Well, maybe that's what we'll have Lauren ponder on next.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. So now, thank you so much for your participation. Now we will be moving towards hands-on approach. So plan and act. So now that we've talked about it, we've reflected on what type of self-care we may have been using or using now or not. I want you to identify one area that currently needs your attention the most. So I want everyone to think out of what Dr. Wright shared with you, all of the parts of Indivisible Self, which area needs your attention the most. And I want you to either write it down for yourself or just quickly post it in a chat, because I want to keep you accountable. I want to make sure you think about this. All right. So thank you, those that are sharing. I think it's very important that you also understand that we can only do one at a time. So Eve, thank you for sharing. Physical, specifically focusing on nutrition. Claudia, creative self. Candace, nutrition, drinking enough water. I'm seeing a lot physical. So Allison, I want you to choose one, either physical or creative. We need to make sure our goals are SMART. Capital, SMART, attainable, physical, nutrition. So a lot of you actually mentioning physical, some of you mentioning creative, excellent. So now that you've all have committed to at least to one area, I want you to think about what prevented you from addressing this area before. I want you to think of at least one barrier that has gotten on the way of you actually paying enough attention. And because we all have it, but just zoom in on the one that was the most unproductive, something that you've done that prevented you. And also I welcome you to post it to the too tired to cook, okay? Time. All right, a lack of planning ahead of time. All right, so it sounds like tiredness, sounds like time. Okay, laziness, I'm sure it's also has something to do with being tired, maybe being overwhelmed, really dealing with a lot. Fatigue, very good. Yes, they're all very, very real. So now that we know what prevented us, we need to think around that. We need to create a plan how to address that. So we considered the barriers, and I want you to think of one thing you can do right now, today, at the end of this conference, that will get you one step closer to meeting that maybe partially the need to improve that area. So I'm going to give you an example. Well, someone's saying meal prep. Yes. Someone's saying go for a swim. Okay. So when we set that goal, Eva, for example, says going for a swim. Eva, do you have an ability to access swimming pool today? That's the question I would be asking of you. Are you setting a realistic expectation? Because the key in any wellness plan is that we set a goal that we can implement immediately, that it is attainable, it is within our control, because otherwise our motivation is going to dissipate. And so committed with walking, committed walking. So can that be that after the conference or in between the sessions, you will go for a walk around your house or your apartment complex? That would be a very attainable goal. Or you will actually create a menu for dinner today, right? So if you are doing a meal prep, what is that you need to do to get one step closer to that? And the last really important step, how are you all going to keep yourself accountable? Because this is another piece. We make plans and we sometimes have really hard time. So I want you to think of who you're going to commit to helping you work on this plan. How are you going to ask them to keep you accountable? And how often are they going to be checking with you? So Laura said she'll begin reading for fun again. Laura, are you able to do it today? And if so, who can help you with keeping you accountable and asking you, Laura, have you read for fun today? How can I help you to give you some time to read for fun today? So again, open to suggestions or Laura, yes, you can download a new book on your Kindle. Excellent. And then just think a little bit further. Who are you going to ask to keep you accountable today? Excellent. Candice is saying communicating the needs to the partner and setting reminders on the phone. I see commitment happening here.
And Eve mentioned her spouse, and I think it's important, and it's a great point, that we identify those people. You remember I said all of those examples? There could be, some things that are present in our lives that are counterproductive or that serve as barriers to us accomplishing these areas, but there are some that really help us. When we talk about people that we have in our lives, we want to make sure that we have those people who will support us in that accountability process, who are supportive by nature, who are encouraging. So Eve, I appreciate you providing an example. Hopefully that's what you're getting.
Yes, and I appreciate all of you sharing and really thinking about that, because in order for us to shift from the menu approach to a comprehensive self-care, we have to plan and we have to act, and we need to be very intentional. Lauren said that she's going to ask her kids to use opportunity to have them give mom the rules. That is excellent. Gardening is also really cool. Yes, thank you. Great ideas.
Said,
right.
It's also saying that I'm purposely taking time off in the way of at-home vacations. And when clients ask about me going away, I reflect with them on things you can do at home to rest, which is absolutely wonderful. We can do that with our clients. We can do that with our students. We can do that with family. Thank you, Rosette.
Dr. Makri, is this you or is it me? Wrapping up.
I think it's still you.
Okay, all right. So what is the most important also of this whole process that we just really ran through today? We ran a sprint through it, and this should be really more of a marathon, a process, but is sharing knowledge with others, right? Obviously, you'll be asking for someone to keep you accountable, but also I want you to reflect on what's the most important thing that you're taking with you from today's presentation.
James is noting intentionality in my own self-care strategies. Yes, accountability. Set smart goals and not forgetting accountability. Being consistent.
Excellent.
Yeah. Very, very
you
good.
are great students.
Hey, students, professionals, regardless of roles and responsibility, this impacts all of us, So it's something that we all have to have that accountability for. We all have to have that intentionality. And many of you, we appreciate you sharing all of these things, even if this is more of a self-reflective internal process that you're going through. be mindful of these things and think about them and how it all relates to your own personal experiences.
Yes, thank you everyone for sharing. And when I meant students of ours here today, yes,
Right.
you're really taking it in. You are being very intentional by being in the moment with us and reflecting and nurturing creativity, using mindfulness. Yes.
Yes, we do. And as we wrap up, and again, we appreciate it. There's a question, do we have a reference list for our presentation? There are 2 additional slides. There is an additional resource slide here, and there is also a reference list here toward the end, so you can see where we got our information from. I'm going to put in the chat my email address, so if there's anything that you want, and Dr. Lainas has done the same.
Yes, you can certainly email all of us or any one of us, and we will make sure we'll share the resource page, the reference list, and even a copy of the presentation with you if you want to sort of implement that, because it is really important for you to share this with others, right? So it's not just you doing it alone, but having others practice that, your students, your colleagues, your family members, anyone.
Well, thank you all very much. We really appreciate the time that you've spent with us this morning, and yeah, we encourage you to share the good news with your children, your clients, your family, your colleagues, but also making sure that you're doing it yourself. So thank you all very much. We'll hang around just for a second until we're kicked out and told to leave.
Yes, and thank you for reminding that it is the process. Yes, thank you.